Think back to the last time you really laughed, not a polite chuckle, but the kind that catches you off guard, the kind that makes it hard to breathe for a second. Chances are it wasn't triggered by a well-crafted joke. It was probably something small, a friend's exact tone of voice, a shared look across a room. Something that wouldn't even make sense written down, that would fall completely flat if you tried to explain it to someone who wasn't there. That's not a coincidence, and it's not unique to you. Somewhere back along an almost incomprehensibly long chain of ancestors, one of them made a sound that would eventually become that exact laugh, and it happened millions of years before anyone had told a single joke. So who was actually first? And why does laughter still barely have anything to do with humor even now? Let's start with a surprising fact that upends how most people think about laughing altogether. Humor came second. Laughter came first by a margin of millions of years. In 2009, a comparative psychologist named Marina Davila-Ross led a study published in the journal Current Biology that took an unusually rigorous approach to a question that had mostly lived in casual observation before. Her team recorded tickle-induced vocalizations from infant and juvenile orangutans, gorillas, chimpanzees, and bonobos, then compared the acoustic structure of those sounds against tickle-induced laughter recorded in human infants. Rather than simply noting that the sounds seemed similar, her team ran the data through the same kind of phylogenetic analysis used to reconstruct evolutionary family trees from genetic evidence, treating each acoustic feature of the laugh-like sounds as a data point. The resulting tree matched the well-established genetic relationships between these species almost perfectly, correctly grouping humans closest to chimpanzees and bonobos, with orangutans branching off earliest, exactly as independent genetic studies had already established. That match is the whole point. It means the laughter itself carries a kind of evolutionary fingerprint, passed down and gradually modified exactly the way a physical trait would be, rather than something each species happened to invent separately. Later research extended the pattern even further, finding laugh-like vocalizations during play and tickling in siamongs, a smaller ape only distantly related to the great apes, hinting that the roots of this behavior may reach back even deeper than orangutans, gorillas, chimps, and bonobos alone. Davila-Ross's analysis placed the origin of this behavior deep in the shared ancestry of humans and great apes, likely stretching back somewhere between 10 and 16 million years, long before anything resembling a modern human or a joke existed anywhere on Earth. Here's what that actually sounded like, because it wasn't the ha-ha you'd recognize today. Primatologist Franz de Waal, describing the sound of a tickled juvenile chimpanzee, noted the same sensitive spots humans have under the arms along the sides and the same wide-open, relaxed-lipped expression. But the sound itself is closer to a rhythmic pant, in and out, breath moving both ways, more like a handsaw working through wood than anything you'd instinctively label a laugh. Psychologist Robert Provin, who spent decades studying this exact question, once played a recording of chimpanzee laughter to over 100 of his students without any visual context. Only 2 guessed correctly what they were hearing. Most assumed it was a dog panting. That difference matters, and it traces back to something surprisingly physical. Provin's research points to bipedalism, walking upright on 2 legs, as the likely turning point. 4-legged primates use their chest and rib cage partly to support their body weight while moving, which locks their breathing into a fixed rhythm tied to their gait. Once human ancestors stood upright, the thorax was freed from that job entirely. Breathing became flexible, controllable, no longer chained to the mechanics of walking. That same new freedom that eventually allowed for the breath control needed for speech also transformed the primal chimp pant into something new. A laugh you could shape, control, and layer into the rhythm of conversation itself, rather than something that only erupted during a wrestling match or a tickle fight. So somewhere, sometime deep in that transition, one particular early hominin let out a sound closer to what you'd recognize as a laugh than anything that came before it. There's no fossil for that moment, no way to pin down a name, a place, or a date. But there doesn't need to be a single origin point for the deeper truth here to hold. Laughter wasn't invented all at once. It was gradually reshaped, breath by breath, generation by generation, out of the same rowdy, physical play your ancestors' ancestors had been sharing for millions of years already. Now here's where the story gets genuinely strange, because everything you probably assume about why you laugh today turns out to be almost backwards. If laughter isn't really about humor, what is it actually doing every time it slips out of you? In the 1990s, Pravin ran an unusual kind of research. He walked through malls, campuses, and parking lots with a hidden recorder, capturing over 1,200 real, unscripted episodes of laughter exactly as they happened in ordinary conversation, along with whatever was said right before each one. Published in the journal Ethology in 1993, his findings dismantled a very common assumption. Only somewhere between 10 and 15% of the comments that triggered laughter were even remotely funny. The overwhelming majority were things like "I'll see you guys later," or "I've got to go now," lines with no joke buried anywhere inside them at all. What Pravin found instead was a precise, almost mechanical pattern. Laughter consistently landed in the natural pauses of speech at the end of a phrase or a sentence, essentially never interrupting the middle of one. Out of that entire sample of 1,200 laughs, only 8 interrupted the flow of speech, and every single one of those was the speaker interrupting themselves. Pravin later found the exact same pattern in congenitally deaf people communicating in sign language, laughing at the same structural points in a signed conversation that hearing people do in a spoken one. He called it the punctuation effect, and it suggested something laughter researchers hadn't fully appreciated before. Laughter behaves less like a response to humor and more like a piece of grammar, a social signal slotted precisely into the rhythm of connecting with another person. Pravin found something else that reframes the whole picture. People are roughly 30 times more likely to laugh in a social setting than when they're completely alone. And when a speaker and a listener are both present, it's the speaker, the one doing the talking, who laughs more often, not the audience, by roughly 50%. Laughter, in other words, isn't primarily something that happens to you when something strikes you as funny. It's something you do instinctively to signal warmth, ease, and connection to whoever you're with, whether or not anything genuinely amusing was ever said at all. Pravin also found that laughter is remarkably contagious, almost involuntarily so. Using brain scans, he showed that simply hearing the sound of someone else laughing activates the premotor cortex, the part of your brain that prepares your own facial muscles to move, essentially priming you to smile or laugh back before you've consciously registered anything funny at all. That single finding explains a piece of television history that seems almost silly on its surface. When the sitcom Laugh Track debuted in 1950 on a show called The Hank McCune Show, it worked precisely because of this ancient contagious reflex, not because viewers were fooled into thinking a real audience was present, but because the mere sound of laughter, real or recorded, was often enough to trigger genuine laughter in the person hearing it. Picture it now, stripped all the way back. Not a comedian, not a punchline, not even language yet. 2 early hominins wrestling in tall grass, breath catching into that same rhythmic pant their ape ancestors had used for millions of years, and something in that shared, breathless moment says unmistakably to both of them, "This is play, this is safe, we are okay." Long before there were words for friendship, that sound was already doing friendship's work. That's the thread running underneath every laugh you've ever had. Not a punchline, but a connection, breath synced with someone else's. An ancient signal reaching all the way back through millions of years of primates play wrestling in the grass, evolving one gradual shift in breath control at a time, until it became the exact sound that leaves your mouth the next time someone you love says something only half funny, and you laugh anyway because the joke was never really the point.